Hi, this is Dana with GMAT Ninja, and today I'm going to talk about our next common error that we see on GMAT critical reasoning, which is caused by pre-thinking. Pre-thinking is basically when you read through a passage, you look at the question, and then you come up with your own answer of how you would strengthen or weaken or whatever it is that you're asked to do in that question. Some of this is going to happen naturally. As you're reading through, you might notice, ooh, okay, here's this huge gap in the argument. Maybe it has something to do with that. But even if that happens naturally, you don't want to really lean into that feeling. We just find that it leads to errors. And particularly, it causes three issues as you go through your GMAT critical reasoning question. The first error is that it causes you to dismiss answer choices that don't look like you're pre-thinking, which then leads you to eliminate the correct option. So, for example, let's say that you are asked to weaken this argument, that it's sunny out, therefore the park is surely crowded. Now, if you're doing pre-thinking, you might look at that and say, oh, okay, well, this reasoning has stuff to do with the weather, so probably my correct answer choice is to do with the weather as well. Maybe you think about, oh, like perhaps the forecast called for rain, and everyone checks the forecast before going to the park. Now, that is sure a viable option if it is one of the answers given to you. But let's say that the actual correct answer is that aliens recently abducted everyone at the park. That would really, really weaken the argument that the park is surely crowded, and yet it has nothing whatsoever to do with the weather. So, what happens when you pre-think is that you kind of close your mind and you're just looking to match your answer choice instead of assessing what you're given, even if it looks nothing like what you expected. The second major problem that we see with pre-thinking is that it causes you to misread answer choices that do look somewhat like the thing that you have thought of previously. What this leads to is keeping the incorrect answer choice. So let's say, same example, you see one that has something to do with the weather. Maybe you're more likely to hang on to that one because you kind of already thought it had something to do with the weather. But if you look at the details of the answer choice, maybe it doesn't actually weaken that argument at all. And the third and final issue that we see with pre-thinking is that it's kind of just a waste of time. Your job is to answer the question with the options that are given to you. You've already got 5 options there. One of them is right, 4 of them are wrong. So your task is to go through those 5 options and not to come up with some other alternate option yourself. So these are all the dangers of pre-thinking. As usual, we will go through some examples now. So what I will do is I will throw one of those up on the board here, take your time to go through that question, and then we will discuss after. All right, let's talk about it. So In this passage, we don't necessarily have a conclusion, but the heart of this passage is kind of this goal, right? What is Ardane's Transportation Commission trying to accomplish here? They're trying to reduce traffic speed and thereby enhance safety in residential neighborhoods. So at the end of the day, that's their goal. They've got a plan to achieve this goal. Their plan is to install multiple speed humps in those neighborhoods. And then they also provide some evidence for that plan. The evidence is that speed humps have reduced traffic speeds on residential streets by 20 to 25% in nearby towns. So seems like a reasonable thing for them to want to do in Ardane as well. Now, let's look at the question. We are trying to identify a potentially serious drawback to the plan for installing speed humps in Ardane. So which of these gives us a potentially serious drawback? Let's check it out. In A, we have, on residential streets without speed humps, many vehicles travel at speeds more than 25% above the posted speed limit. So that kind of interacts with this evidence, right, which tells us that these speeds have been reduced by about 20 to 25% in nearby towns. So what A is telling us is that we might have a bit more of a serious problem in Ardane, right? We've got these speeds that are even higher than 25%. What that does is actually make it seem more likely that we need these speed humps, right? We need something. Enforcement of speed limits through police monitoring has been ineffective, so we need something to slow these people down. Speed humps seem like a great idea. We also have no additional information about, safety or anything like that. So all we can say is, well, if they reduce it 20 to 25%, then we will, in fact, reduce traffic speed and increase safety, even if that's not quite enough to really reduce everyone down to the actual speed limit itself. So A, after reading A, I still think that these speed humps seem like a good idea. So we will go ahead and eliminate A, not really a serious drawback. B, because of their high weight, emergency vehicles such as fire trucks and ambulances must slow down almost to a stop at speed humps. So this is where pre-thinking will absolutely kill you, because we have not heard anything whatsoever about emergency vehicles in our passage or in our question. So this kind of comes out of left field. It's really not going to be something that you're automatically going to think of before you actually come across this answer choice. But let's just think about it. Let's say you're having an emergency, your house is on fire, or you need an ambulance, and the town is installing these speed humps that makes it so these emergency vehicles have to slow almost to a stop in order to get where they're going. That is a really serious drawback. We want these vehicles to be able to get where they're going quickly to address whatever emergency that they're trying to address, and these speed humps are going to prevent them from doing so. So B, even though it has nothing whatsoever to do with the information already presented, does give us a potentially serious drawback to installing the speed humps, so let's keep B. C. The residential speed limit in Ardane is higher than that of nearby towns where speed humps were installed. We really have no idea how this interacts with the information here. So the speed limit is higher. Just kind of seems like, all right, these speed humps will reduce that speed. Seems still like a good idea to throw the speed humps in there. There's nothing here that identifies a drawback to installing these speed humps. Get rid of C. D. Motorists who are not familiar with the streets in Ardane's residential districts would be likely to encounter the speed humps unawares unless warned by signs and painted indicators. The passage talks about installing speed humps, but it doesn't preclude anyone from also installing these signs and indicators. So probably seems like a good idea to also build these signs and these indicators, but it doesn't give us a drawback to installing the humps themselves. So D, not a serious drawback, get rid of it. And our final option here, E. Bicyclists generally prefer that speed humps be constructed so as to leave a space on the side of the road where bicycles can travel without going over the humps. We don't get much detail about exactly how these speed humps are going to be constructed. We learn that they are raised areas of pavement placed across residential streets about 300 feet apart. But it doesn't really tell us what's going on the sides of those speed humps. So it could be that exactly as planned, there already is a space for bikes to go on the side of the street around that speed hump. So because we don't exactly know, how these speed humps are going to be built, it could be that they already are accounting for the stuff in E. So Not really a serious drawback. Get rid of E. That leaves us only with B, which is our correct answer choice. Let's do another example. I'll throw it up on the board. As always, take your time going through that, and we will discuss it after. All right, let's break down this passage. The author starts off with a conclusion, concludes that building a space station in which astronauts would live for an extended period of time is essential even if the space station project were to contribute no new knowledge about space or Earth that could not otherwise be obtained. That's kind of a lot. I think it's helpful to break it down just a little bit here. The heart of this sentence is that building a space station is essential. Then beyond that, we get a little bit more information about this space station. We learn that astronauts would live in the space station for an extended period of time. And then we also get this condition, right? So this is essential even if we don't get these other types of knowledge about space and Earth. So why does the author believe that building a space station is essential? The reason is that for future missions to explore Mars, we will need the medical knowledge that the space station will give us about the limits of human capacities to live in spacecraft for an extended time. So that gives us a reason why the author thinks that building a space station is essential. The question asks which of these options is an assumption that the argument makes. So good moment to pause and think about what are we really looking for here? An assumption made by the argument is something that absolutely must be true in order for the argument to hold up. So we're looking for something that really needs to be true, some gap that absolutely needs to be filled in order for the conclusion to hold. Let's go through process of elimination. Starting with A, we have the exploration of Mars will be carried out by people traveling in spacecraft and not by robots alone. This is that point where pre-thinking will get you. So if you see the word robots and you think, well, we're not talking about robots, get rid of A, then you are kind of throwing out this option without actually thinking through the implications. So let's think about it. What if only robots were going to be doing these missions to Mars? Well, the entire reason why the author thinks that this space station is essential is because we are going to get medical knowledge about the limits of human capacities to live in spacecraft. So if humans are not actually going to go to Mars on these future missions, then we would not need this medical knowledge, and therefore it would not be essential to build a space station. So we absolutely do need to assume that it's going to be people traveling on these missions to Mars and not just robots. So that makes A an assumption of the argument. So we can go ahead and keep A in, even if it's kind of a surprising option. Let's go through the rest of process of elimination. B, the capacities of astronauts are typical of those of ordinary human beings. So an astronaut is someone who goes into space. And here we've got some people in space in the space station. Here we've got some people in space going to Mars. So we don't actually need to assume that these astronauts all have typical capacities as people on Earth, right? Maybe the people going up into the space station and going on these missions to Mars are all really fit and buff, and all of us down here on Earth are kind of schlubby. That's totally fine. As long as we are gaining knowledge that's going to be useful from the astronauts in the space station for the astronauts going to Mars, then we are totally fine. So we don't need to assume that the capacities of astronauts are typical of ordinary people, and that's why we can get rid of B. C, no unforeseen medical problems will arise on the first mission to explore Mars. So unforeseen medical problems, let's think about that for a minute. What does that mean? That could be anything. It could be breaking a leg, it could be getting a cut, it could be something to do with gravity or whatever. So an unforeseen medical problem could really be anything. Do we need to assume that no unforeseen medical problems will arise? Not necessarily, right? So the author thinks that building this space station will give us knowledge about the limits of human capacities. But that doesn't mean that there will be absolutely no unforeseen issues that will arise. As long as we gain some knowledge about these, medical things, then the author is happy. The author still thinks that building this space station is essential. So the argument is completely compatible with additional unforeseen medical stuff arising on this first mission to Mars. It could still be very essential to build this space station and figure out the stuff that we can figure out. So that's why C is not an assumption made by the argument. D, a mission to Mars will be the first of many missions that will explore the solar system. Now, notice here that the author cares particularly about future missions to explore Mars, not to explore the rest of the solar system. So that stands out where we really don't need to assume that we're going to be exploring the rest of the solar system. For the author, it's enough to say, hey, we need this space station so we can go explore Mars itself. The other word that pops up in D is many, right? Many missions. The author just says future missions to explore Mars. That being a plural word just means more than one. So it could just be 2 missions. If we use this medical knowledge from the space station to do 2 missions just to Mars, then the author is happy. So we don't need to assume that this mission will be the first of many missions and that these missions will explore any other parts of the solar system. So that's why D is not a totally required assumption. Get rid of D. And finally, we have E. Living in a spaceship for an extended time presents insurmountable medical problems. Insurmountable is an interesting word here, right? It means cannot surmount. So something that is just this problem that we're never, ever going to be able to solve. The whole point of this space station is that we can solve some of these, right? We can figure out these limitations of human capacities and gain this medical knowledge, right? So we don't need to have insurmountable problems. Perhaps there are some, maybe people's bones get weaker or whatever, no idea. But we don't need there to be insurmountable problems, right? Instead, we just need the capacity to increase our knowledge about medical stuff. And then the author is happy and the argument holds up. So because we don't need insurmountable medical problems, we can go ahead and get rid of E. And that leaves only A on the board, and A is our correct answer, even if it kind of comes out of nowhere. So we'll do one more example. I'll go ahead and pop that on the screen. As always, take your time, and then we will discuss it afterward. All right, let's go ahead and break down this passage. Here, the author gives us something like a discrepancy and then provides a possible explanation that resolves this discrepancy or this conundrum. So the discrepancy itself is that wild berries are not as rich in calories as insects, and as thrushes migrate, they feed almost exclusively on these wild berries. Yet, on the other side of our discrepancy, thrushes need to consume plenty of calories in order to complete their migration. So, why the heck are they switching to this lower calorie food when they need plenty of calories in order to complete their migration? The author then provides us with that one possible explanation of why these birds are making the switch. Author says that the berries contain other nutrients that thrushes need for migration, and that the insects lack. So that gives one reason, right, why these birds are switching from the insects to the berries right before they start their migration. Now, the question asks us to call into question the explanation given for the thrush's diet during migration. So, what calls this explanation into question and says that this is not really the thing that actually resolves the issue that we're seeing elsewhere in the passage? Let's go through process of elimination. A. Hermit thrushes, if undernourished, are unable to complete their autumn migration before onset of winter. Uh, Lots of stuff going on here, right? That word undernourished could refer to nutrients, or it could refer to calories, or it could refer to both. So it's really hard to say how that fits into this discussion about nutrients and calories. And overall, it just doesn't actually provide anything one way or the other to explain why these birds are going to switch from the insects to the berries. Just tells us that, like, hey, they need to be well nourished. So A doesn't really do anything whatsoever to our possible explanation. Let's get rid of A. B. Insect species contain certain nutrients that are not found in wild berries. Here, certain nutrients, it doesn't actually specify whether the thrushes themselves need these nutrients or whether they particularly need these nutrients for migration. So if they did need these particular nutrients for migrations, maybe it would be, call into question the fact that they're switching to berries for nutrients. But we don't get that information, right? We just know that, okay, the insects have these nutrients. The birds are getting them the rest of the year. Maybe they just don't need those during the migration season or whatever. So B doesn't give us quite enough to really call into question this argument about why the switch is being made. C. For songbirds, catching insects requires the expenditure of significantly more calories than eating wild berries does. This is where pre-thinking will get you, because if you're looking at this possible explanation, right, that is talking all about nutrients, then maybe you're looking for something nutrient related as you go through your answer choices. And this talks about calories and not about nutrients, whereas something like B talks about nutrients. But let's take a look at C and see what it does in relation to our possible explanation. So if it requires significantly more calories to catch insects than to eat wild berries, then what this gives us is kind of an idea about the net calories that the birds are getting when they use each source of food, right? So now C is not this smoking gun that absolutely proves that these birds get more calories on balance by eating berries, but it does call into question this idea, right? Maybe they actually do get more calories on balance by eating berries because they don't have to spend as many calories in order to get the berries as they would to get the insects. What that gives us is this alternate reason for why they are making this switch. Perhaps it has nothing whatsoever to do with the nutrients, and it just is that they, on balance, end up with more calories when they eat wild berries than when they eat insects. So, because C provides this alternate reason why the thrushes might be making this switch, it does call into question the possible explanation that is discussed in the passage. So let's keep C. D. Along the hermit thrush's migration routes, insects are abundant throughout the migration season. D, if it was opposite, right? If it said that these insects were not abundant, might contribute something, right? Because if they're not abundant, then maybe these birds really don't want to be eating the wild berries. Maybe they'd really prefer to be eating insects, but they're not abundant, they're not available, right? And they have to make this switch, right? That would be potentially a reason why these birds have started eating the berries right before their migration. However, D does say that they are abundant throughout the migration season. So that doesn't actually give us another reason why they're making this switch, doesn't give us any reason to doubt this explanation that the author has given us. So we can go ahead and get rid of D. And E. There are some species of wild berries that hermit thrushes generally do not eat, even though these berry species are exceptionally rich in calories. So we already know that the berries that the hermit thrushes eat are not as calorically rich as insects. D tells us that there are other berries that they don't eat that do have more calories, but doesn't really tell us why, right? It could be that these things are poisonous, or maybe they're not even available at the right times or something like that. So we have no idea really what E tells us in relation to this possible explanation, because we just don't have enough information about these other wild berries. So E doesn't really give us reason to doubt our explanation. Get rid of it. And that leaves us with C, which is our correct answer choice. All right, I hope this has been a useful video. That's the end of our examples. Please go ahead and leave any comments, questions below, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.